I firmly believe that a relationship is not a failure simply because it ends, that sometimes the ending of a relationship is part of its evolution.
Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore all aspects of ending relationships, separation, and parenting apart. If your marriage or partnership has ended, or you have friends and family who are separating, this podcast is for you. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples. In each episode, we look at relationships and separation from different angles, including the emotional, legal, and social. I'm joined by experts and special guests who share their own unique stories, experience, and tips, with the goal of helping people end relationships in a kinder and better way. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Elizabeth Day. Elizabeth is an award-winning author, acclaimed podcaster and broadcaster, known for her honest and compassionate explorations of modern life, relationships and failure. Her latest book, One of Us, is her 10th, following the success of her previous non-fiction title, Friendaholic, Confessions of a Friendship Addict, which became an instant Sunday Times #1 bestseller. Her novels, including the bestseller Magpie and The Party, have been praised for their psychological insight and social commentary. Elizabeth is the recipient of a Betty Trask Award and a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. She's also the creator and host of the chart-topping podcast How to Fail, where she interviews public figures about lessons they've learned from setbacks. Through her production company, Daylight Productions, she works to amplify female and underrepresented voices in podcasting. Elizabeth has written and spoken candidly about her personal journey, including the emotional challenges of infertility, experiences she shared in an effort to break the silence and the stigma around the subject. She's also explored the evolution of her romantic life, including the end of her first marriage and the self-redefinition that followed. After years of growth and reflection, she's found lasting love with the entrepreneur Justin Bassini, whom she married in 2021. The couple now live in southwest London with their much-loved ginger cat. Her openness, vulnerability and resilience and human connection continues to resonate with readers and listeners around the world. If you loved this episode, then please subscribe and rate us on your preferred listening platform. Welcome, Elizabeth.
That was such an amazing introduction. Thank you.
Such an amazing person. I'm delighted to be sharing this time with you. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for the work that you do. And I relish the chance to talk about this. It doesn't get enough airtime. So thank you for having me.
Well, like you, we want to try and break stigma, and we want to try and make things like relationship transitions, as we like to call them, public property, and to talk about them so they are destigmatized and so people aren't feeling ashamed or embarrassed if a relationship ends. And I'm interested because I've listened to several of your podcasts, and you talk a lot about relationships and the transitioning between relationships. And obviously your podcast is called How to Fail. So I kind of wanted to start with the big question of, are relationship endings really failures? Or is that something else? Should we describe them in a slightly different way?
It's such a profound question, and I think there's something else. So I firmly believe that a relationship is not a failure simply because it ends, that sometimes the ending of a relationship is part of its evolution, and it's part of that amazing phrase you used in the introduction, re-self-definition too. And so sometimes endings are one thing and necessary to usher the next thing in, and they're also necessary to let all parties grow and let all parties go on their own journey. And if an ending is well managed, it can in and of itself be an expression of love, I think. And that's the aspiration. I'm very aware that it's not always the case. But I remember, heartbreak is incredibly difficult, and I don't want to trivialize it. Heartbreak is a form of grief, and I've had a fair amount of romantic heartbreak in my life. And I remember at the end of my last breakup feeling at the lowest point, and it was actually the first relationship I'd got into post-divorce. So there were various hopes and expectations that I'd attached to it, thinking, well, I've learnt my lessons and I've made different decisions this time. And when that one ended, it was almost like I'd taken down all of the emotional scaffolding that I'd erected to avoid looking at the sort of destroyed building of my former marriage. And I felt so low. And I remember various people saying, you will look back on this and you'll be so grateful that this relationship ended. And I wasn't ready to hear it. And I found it really annoying when people said that to me. But spoiler alert, they all turned out to be speaking the truth. Yeah. I'm incredibly grateful that every single one of those relationships that did end did so in the way that they did at the time that they did, because otherwise I would not have learnt the necessary lessons that I can now bring to my relationship with Justin. And I think that that's actually really helped both of us.
I like the idea that all roads lead to here, and the idea that, you know, we wouldn't be who we are, we wouldn't be in the relationships that we are in now had we not had that previous history. And what do you think then that you took from that last relationship to bring you into this new one? What were the lessons that you learned?
So many, Kate. I think one of the key lessons was that you cannot divorce actions from character. So you were kind enough to mention that I am also a writer as well as having my own podcast. Now, I know I'm capable of telling a great story, often to myself.
Yes.
And so the power of imagination, it's a wonderful tool, but sometimes that meant that I would meet someone and I would tell myself the most involved, convoluted, romantic story about how we would end up together and what kind of partner they would be. And I forgot to pay attention to who they actually were. And I did them a disservice as well as myself by doing that. And ultimately, I came to realize that if someone has broken up with you, and if, as it did for me, that came as a huge shock, then that is a testament to the kind of character that they are. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything good or bad about that. I'm just saying that it really helped me to think, well, do I want to be with someone? Do I want to be in a relationship where I am capable of being so shocked like that, where I have the rug pulled out from under me? Because at best, what it shows is that there's a lack of communication, reciprocal communication. And maybe that means that there's a lack of safety and a lack of trust. And so the idea that you can't separate actions from character was one of the big lessons that I learned. And I think another thing that I learned was that what I thought I wanted wasn't actually what I needed. And I had to do a lot of unpacking. Yeah. And my best friend, who is also a therapist, really helped me with that. And to the extent that when I met Justin, although there was immediate chemistry and I thought he was great, I just wasn't sure it was going to work because he was so consistent in his communication.
The curse of the nice man.
He was so nice and showing up and being he was so straightforward. And I wasn't used to someone being so straightforward. Yeah. I was used to love bombing and game playing. And that to me felt familiar. And that to me felt...
And exciting.
Exactly. And I mistook the anxiety that triggers for a kind of passion and romance. And obviously it's completely separate. Yeah. And then I think the final thing I've learned is the value of communication. And it's ironic that it took me that long as someone who is a communicator in her professional life. But for communication to happen with honesty, there needs to be this really solid foundation where you have faith that your partner is not going to think the worst of you. Their default will always be to think the best. And then they might have to work back and call you out on some of your stuff as you would do for them. But I have complete faith that Justin will be able to receive whatever I need to say to him and vice versa. And that's been a long process. That didn't just happen. And actually, I think it's made me understand that the sort of love I'm interested in is one that is slowly built over time. And actually, that's a really beautiful thing.
And do you think you have to be a certain kind of maturity emotionally or even physically to be able to access that? Or do you think anyone can have it and you're just kind of, some people are really good at it and they can connect in that way from youth, and other people it just takes longer? Or
that's such a good question.
Something that just comes with age?
I don't think so, actually. I think you can be incredibly emotionally mature at a far younger age than I was. It just so happened that I wasn't. I was very mature in some ways. And I came across as mature because I seemed like I was together, and professionally, I was experiencing some success and I'd always done well academically. But actually looking back, I realized that kind of cycle of approval was a placeholder for a deeper sort of love that saw me for who I actually was rather than who I was performing, who I wanted to be. And so it's taken me a while, but I think it's accessible for people at younger ages, just as I think it's inaccessible for some people for all of their lives. And a lot of that has to do with the other kinds of relationships we have in our lives beyond romantic. So parental relationships, sibling relationships, relationships with friends, professional relationships. I've learned so much about a partnership, romantically speaking, from those other relationships. And the most important one is the relationship with yourself. And I don't think I'd spent enough time on that. So I did some really good therapy.
A breakup's always such an amazing opportunity, isn't it, to do exactly that, to spend the time with yourself and to do the work. And when you were kind of after divorcing and before moving into the next relationship, is that when you did the work, or did it come kind of later?
I think it came later. I think I would have said then, this is when I'm doing the work, but I wasn't doing it, not really.
Okay.
And actually...
So how are you cheating then?
I was cheating because actually I was a proper jumper of lily pads. So I would end one relationship and go into another one as soon as I possibly could. Okay. To the extent that from the age of 19 till I got divorced age 36, I was in a series of back-to-back monogamous long-term relationships. So that's what enabled me not to look at myself. Yeah. I thought I was being very grown up, but I wasn't really. And then post-divorce, I think, I mean, you will know this better than anyone really, but it was such a shock. Even though it was a long time coming, and even though I was the one who made the decision to leave, it was
still a shock. Yes.
Still a shock.
Yeah.
It was such a shock that I had got to that position and that somehow my body and my instinct took over and was like, no, you have to leave. And then it was a shock to discover that you're allowed to do that. I know that sounds silly, but having grown up in a certain era where you're socially conditioned as I was, and I really do believe in the sanctity of marriage, and I didn't want to let my friends and family down, and all of those people who had given us a wedding gift and who'd shown up to the church that day.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So there's also a great deal of sort of shame and failure that goes into that. And in the aftermath of that shock, I think it just took me a while to right myself. And I went to LA for a few months because I wanted to go somewhere completely different, but where I could still speak the language and I could still work. So I had a job. I was a Sunday newspaper feature writer, and I pitched them the idea of having an LA correspondent, and I'm lucky enough that they agreed. And that was really healing for me. Right. But I think it was healing in the sense that it got me over that initial period of shock and panic because I no longer knew what my life was going to look like next. Yeah. And when I really started doing the work was after that relationship breakup, post-divorce. Yes. So I got into a new relationship. I guess I'd been divorced or separated for about a year and got into a new relationship with very different hopes and really thought I'd nailed it. And that one ended after 2 years. And at that stage, I really had to confront the honest truth, which was I was about to turn 39. I wasn't where I thought I would be, personally speaking. And it felt as though I was staring down the barrel of my 40s, not having any of the things that I'd so long dreamed of, not having the babies, not having the relationship. And that was a really scary place to be. And so I think that's when I started doing the work. And it's also not entirely coincidentally when I launched my podcast, How to Fail, because I was so drawn to understanding failure and to seeking other people's guidance on it because I wanted to know how to get through it.
And it's just so fascinating, isn't it, that we still labour under this idea that divorce is a failure and the end of a relationship is a failure. I don't see it like that on a good day. On a bad day, I still, of course, you internalise it, don't you? And it's hard to not feel a sense of failure when you feel like you've been through a series of long-term relationships, and as I have as well. And you kind of get to a point where you want to be a success at it and you want to have the kind of happy ending. And when you keep coming up against it, it's not turning out that way. It's painful. But I like to think of us as trees. So I think of us as trees, and we have seasons, and a relationship might be a full year of seasons. So you might have the buds of the beginning of a relationship. It might go into a full leaf, and then the leaves might fall, and then it's winter and the trees bare again. And I kind of like to see relationships like that they follow a cycle and a season. And who knows how many seasons we've all got in us, but it's not, I don't look at winter and see winter as a failure. So why would I look at the end of a relationship and consider it a failure? And I just think that if we could reframe as a kind of society how we looked and talked about relationships, I think we'd remove some of the stigma, because I worry that it's the stigma sometimes that locks people into destructive and defensive patterns and locks people into an isolated world, particularly men as well, interestingly, where they don't share feelings, they don't talk about it, and their inner life becomes absolute hell and turmoil.
Yes, that's so beautifully put. And actually, to extend the tree metaphor, we all have so many branches and so many roots. And I suppose I see a lot of my past relationships as those roots. They are the roots that give me the ability to grow and to expand, and the knowledge and the wisdom. I think I don't see my divorce as a failure anymore. I did see it as a failure when I was going through it. And the biggest failure that I found the hardest to deal with was the failure of self. I couldn't believe that I had such a lack of self-knowledge, that I had made the decisions that I had. Yeah. And you're so right that so many people deal with that, and that it is particularly difficult for men in this day and age to be able to open up about that and to find a safe space where they can do that. And that's why it's so invaluable, the work that you are doing.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you're right, it's from a psychotherapy background, which is my background, we always talk to people about self-love and having compassion for yourself and compassion for the decisions that you make and self-acceptance. And, you know, I sit here and I know this intellectually, and I say this to people when I was practicing, but it's so tricky to actually practice that self-love in a really genuine way where you can accept the decisions and say to yourself, okay, I made a bad decision or I made a mistake. It doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't make me a failure. It makes me someone who's human, who makes mistakes, and then we move on. But it's so easy to say and so difficult to do. And I guess that's the pain of splitting up and breaking up, and what this podcast is all about.
Exactly that. And I often say that just because you fail does not make you a failure. The true test of your character is in how you respond to it, and in choosing to learn from it and to grow from it. Another thing I say is that all failure is data acquisition about what you can do differently next time, or how you can prepare differently. But you're right that it is so hard to internalize. And ultimately, that is a lifelong journey, that sort of act of self-compassion. And simply saying those things to yourself, even if you don't feel them to begin with, I still believe in the power of saying it to yourself and flexing that internal muscle in the same way that you would work out your physical muscles in the gym. Ultimately, faking it actually does lead to a growth in confidence sometimes.
So you make it. Yeah, exactly. No, I agree. So I was interested earlier when you were talking about the different types of relationships and how friendships and relationships with siblings and family can contribute to the way that you then go on and move on and grow into your next romantic relationship. What do you think, or how do you think those relationships, those other relationships, helped you navigate that sort of breakup journey that you went through?
This is why I love being interviewed by a therapist, because the questions are so on point. It's such a good question. I think one of the things that friendship particularly taught me was that I would never be alone if I didn't want to be. And that's such a beautiful gift to be given in this lifetime, and is partly why I'm so obsessed with my friends and why I wrote a whole book about them. Because I do think platonic love has been the longest, most consistent love affair of my life. And my friends have been there to pick me up when I have felt grief-struck and heartbroken. And they've been there with such acceptance and generosity that it made me begin to realize that I could be lovable even when I was at my lowest. And that's a huge thing to realize about yourself. And I think one of the things that had consistently driven me into relationships that weren't functional in some way was that overriding existential fear of ending up all alone at the end of my life, which I know many people share. It had a particular emphasis for me because I also had fertility struggles and I don't have children of my own. And so there's that part to package in as well, this fear that it'll just be me and no one will love me. And I now know that my friends will. And I also have to say my family were really accepting and supportive in a way that I hadn't necessarily, it wasn't that I didn't expect them to be like that. It was that I didn't think they had an obligation to be like that. So when I got divorced, they didn't question it really. They were like, no, we can completely see why, and we're here for you. And that again was a huge act of generosity and a discovery, actually, that I wasn't in it alone. So I think that's probably the most valuable thing. But the other thing is that my friendships have modeled so much about how to love and what I really respect and admire in the ways other people love and the ways I hope to love them in return. And so one of the things that I have thought a lot about is that people have different ways of being a friend. In the same way that we're told famously that there are 5 different love languages, there are also different friendship languages. And for me, the most important friendship metric is generosity of spirit. So it goes back to that idea that I was mentioning earlier, that your friend or loved one will always start by thinking the best of you. That's their default setting. And so if you don't manage to call them that week, or your diary is busy and you don't manage to get away for that mini break, they are not automatically thinking, exactly. They're not automatically thinking badly of you or making you feel guilty. So that misplaced guilt can go out the window, because I don't know about you, Kate, but I feel guilty sort of 98% of the time for zero reason. And actually it just takes up so much energy that you could be using for other more joy-filling things. And so I think it's really helped me look for that in my romantic relationship as well.
I really like this idea that we don't have to separate relationships into these very rigid boxes of there being platonic relationships and being romantic relationships. But actually, as humans, we have this journey through relationships, and we might have different quantities of those types of relationships at any point in our sort of life journey. And then actually we can take lessons. And I love that analogy of taking the lessons of your friendships and putting those into the romantic relationships and what you've learned from them. Because that's kind of like having siblings as well, isn't it? They say you learn lots when you're scrapping it out with your brother/sister, when you're little. And I think we do take a lot of those lessons. But I hadn't really thought of how much your friendships play into what you look for in a romantic relationship. It's super interesting.
Yeah, they also really practically supported me. So when I lost all faith in my own judgment, which I did.
Yeah, me too.
It's actually a really scary thing, isn't it?
Yeah. I can't trust myself. So where do you go from there? It's difficult. Yeah.
And when I was in that phase, I sort of outsourced my dating life to my friends. So if you can find those cornerstone trusted relationships and be like, okay, set me up with someone that you think is right for me, to the extent that when I matched with Justin, my now husband, on Hinge, I was so unsure of myself, of everything. And on our 3rd date, we went for dinner and I invited Emma, my best friend. And I said to him, I was like, I have to get you to meet my best friend because she's really important to me. And he sort of knew the subtext of that was, if she doesn't like you,
you're out. Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah,
mate.
Yeah.
And all credit to him. And again, it was one of the key things I thought, oh, this is a really good man. He was like, absolutely, how great. And the 3 of us went for dinner. And the next day, I remember Emma sending me a thumbs up emoji. And I was like, okay, phew, I've got clearance to continue.
Judgment restored.
Yes. And she continued to do that for me. Yeah. So I was able to sort of sense check with her because I knew that she knew me better than I know myself. And I knew that she had my best interests at heart. And it was really incredibly helpful to have that.
It's so interesting, isn't it? As you say that, I'm thinking that there's a loss almost of individuality, isn't there? Or sense of self when a relationship ends and you're thrust out, rejected from a relationship. As you say, whether you've been the instigator or not, there's still that sense of it hasn't worked. I'm rejected from this. I haven't been able to make it work. And there you lose that identity that you've built up as part of that relationship. And you're almost having to rebuild yourself then, aren't you? And put yourself back together. And then I guess your friends are the helping hands in that, aren't they? Because they've known you usually prior to that relationship. They've been with you for a long time. And they're the people who help stack you back, I guess.
Definitely. It's a really difficult thing to go through. And especially if you are someone who historically has struggled with jealousy or low self-esteem or a fear of scarcity, the idea that you could go through a breakup and that then your partner will find someone quote unquote better can haunt you. And actually, this is going to sound trivial and I don't mean it to be, I love reality TV because of what it's taught me about human nature. And one of the things that genuinely has helped me navigate those sort of feelings is Love Island.
Okay. I wasn't expecting that.
If you watch Love Island, as I do, as a sort of anthropological experiment, although I now am literally old enough to be some of the contestants' grandmother, you see people couple up and then they might get on really well and then a bombshell might enter the villa and they might have more of a connection with them. And it's the reason I think it's interesting is because the people that I might find attractive are not necessarily the people that other contestants will, and vice versa. And so actually it's a really good reminder that there are just different folks for different strokes. Yeah. And it's sort of reassuring to see other people going through that. And it also taught me a lot watching the early seasons of Love Island about what I was doing wrong. Because sometimes I think I would try too hard to shapeshift in order to be lovable.
What that person wanted in that moment, yeah.
Exactly, so that they wouldn't leave me. And ultimately what that did for me, and what I think it does for many people, is that you become such an inveterate people pleaser that you outsource your sense of self entirely to what you believe someone else wants of you, not even what they want of you, what you're projecting they might want of you. And that makes you a shell of a human being. And that's also what delayed my doing the work on myself, because I didn't really know who myself was.
Yeah, or what you wanted. And you become, like you say, a shell and inauthentic. Because you're not being your true self, you're not quite hitting the mark with what the other person wants because you don't ever know exactly what someone else wants. So then you're in no man's land, aren't you? And then you're unhappy and there are arguments and it never seems to quite gel.
Totally. And it never works because either the other person can sniff out the inauthenticity, so they don't feel that safe either, or they really like you performing, in which case you can never take the risk of showing up as your full self.
Exactly. You can't ever take your foot off the gas.
And it's horrible. Treading on eggshells and feeling like you have to be perfect is so exhausting and draining and debilitating. And so either way, it's just so much better to work out who you are and take the risk, as you say, of being on your own for a bit, dating yourself first.
And not seeing it as rejection if the other person doesn't want it, but just seeing it as them as that's not what they want. It's kind of both, but it's like personal and not personal. I like that analogy of Love Island because it's like you can see then it's not personal, but it is personal at the same time. But it's just, like you say, it's other people making a different choice.
Totally.
And that's not about you. It's about them. So you don't need to sweat it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's their emotional pathology. It's like something bad that happened to them in the playground, age 6, that you could have had no control over. The analogy that I keep coming back to that really, really helps me is that I love cheese. I mean, I'm obsessed about cheese and cats. There are some people in this world who don't like cheese or they're lactose intolerant. They can't eat it. Now, I can't relate to that, but I respect that there are some people who don't like cheese. And that, for some reason, has just really helped me. Because I'm like, well, they're missing out because I love cheese and there are so many different varieties.
I like it. What do you think if there are people listening who are going through kind of the end of a relationship now? What do you think you can say to them that would give them some hope, courage, positivity, something to take with them as they're just at the kind of worst bit of the journey right now?
There's a couple of things. The first thing I want to say is that I am so sorry for what you're going through. And you're doing amazingly. Just by putting one foot in front of the other, getting through it day by day, I want you to know that you are so much stronger than you believe you are. And that is what you will be taught. On the other side of this, you will look back, and it could be that the only meaningful thing this breakup or breakdown has taught you is that you can survive it. But that in and of itself is an extraordinary show of courage. And that will give you a sense of your own resilience for the future. And that's an amazing place to be in. It's a very powerful place to be in. So I don't want you to dismiss the grief that you're feeling, but I do want you to know that there is a way of living alongside it that brings your life some kind of meaning, even if that meaning is, I've survived it. The other two pieces of advice I want to give are actually not my own. There was a podcast that I listened to when I was going through heartbreak, and it was Eckhart Tolle being interviewed by Oprah Winfrey.
Brilliant, isn't he? I love him.
He's so brilliant.
Yeah.
And he said this thing, and I remember exactly where I was when I heard it. I was on a crowded District Line tube. And he said, what if you chose to believe that you had chosen everything that had happened to you? What might that be teaching you? So, of course, you don't want to be going through divorce, heartbreak, breakups right now. But do a mental experiment if you possibly can. What would you try to be saying to yourself if you had chosen for that to happen? And that really helped me. If I had chosen for this to happen, I'd be saying to myself, this wasn't the right relationship for me. This is the stuff that I'm learning. This is the stuff that I'm going to take forward. This is the stuff that I'm not going to settle for next time. This is how I'm going to prepare better. This is how I'm going to be kinder to myself. All of those things are wrapped up in that single question. And then the third thing I'd say, I was lucky enough to interview a man called Mo Gaudat on season 4 of How to Fail. And he was probably the first guest of mine that went really viral. And I, again, was going through a breakup. It sounds like I'm constantly going through breakups. A lot of it was the same two that I'm referring. And I said, what would you, precisely what you've asked me, what would you say to anyone who is in the sort of final throes of a relationship? And he said, the first thing I'd say to them is congratulations. Yeah. Because I guarantee you that this relationship was not working for many months, if not years before this point. And you need to end this relationship to find the love that is worthy of you. He was like, there are however many millions, billions of people on the planet. He's like, I guarantee you that if you want to, you will find love. Yeah. And it might not be love that you expect in the package that you thought you wanted it in, but it will be love of some description if you open your heart to it. So those are the things that I would say.
I think that's amazing. And what I love about all of that is it's about taking back the control. Because I think part of the hardest thing, and certainly we know when people come to us, one of the most difficult things is when you're not the instigator, when you feel things have been done to you and you don't want this to happen. That can leave you in a really stuck place. And all of these decisions about getting divorced and sorting out kids and finances are all being made around you when you're in that real resistance phase. It can be super difficult. And one of the things that helps people is getting a sense of control back. So listening, I mean, Eckhart Tolle is the guru, the master, isn't he? But I think that's the essence of what he was saying, is that you take back the control and then you will navigate this in a different way. So
exactly. And I'm very aware as I'm talking that I've never experienced a divorce with children. Mm-hmm. So I can't even begin to imagine how difficult and complex that is. But one of the pieces of advice that my best male friend gave me when I was going through the breakdown of a relationship was, let them feel the absence of you. Mm. Now, it doesn't have to be just disappearing from their lives, because that's not manageable if you co-parent children. But there are some ways in which you can cut off the supply of your love. Mm. And actually, that's not a malicious thing to do. It's a self-preservation act in that you cannot be building up yourself if you are constantly giving to someone else who is rejecting it. And either way, you'll make them feel the absence, and they might understand that it's not what they want and they want to try again. or you've built up your sense of self to an extent that you realise, actually, it's not what I want.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the point about the children for me is simple. You wouldn't want to role model a relationship that's dying, that's not mutual, that's not growing, and is not filled with love to children. And we often get people say, oh, we'll stay together because of the children, or we'll time a breakup around them leaving or going to university or whatever. But that just makes sometimes a mockery of their childhoods, and kids don't want that. You want them to see what a good relationship looks like. And that's what we're all trying to do, isn't it? Model good relationships. And I think we're particularly rubbish as humans at actually supporting and promoting what a positive relationship should look like. And instead we spend a lot of time spiraling down around negative relationships and highlighting them, and social media and all the TV stuff now doesn't help. But I would love to imagine a world where actually we spend as much time talking about what makes a positive relationship, rather like we have been today, because I think that's where I want my energy to go, in making relationships positive, hopeful experiences, and accepting that lots of them have all of them have a finality to them. They have a lifespan, they will grow, they will live, they will die. And then I don't want people to be in a negative, horrible spiral, chucked back out into the world with all of the awfulness and self-doubt and self-loathing that sometimes comes with a badly managed breakup. So
I completely agree. And actually, I recently interviewed Monica Lewinsky on my podcast, How to Fail, and she had this amazing line, which a therapist told her, which is, don't think that because you've made the right decision, you're going to live a life without regret.
yeah.
And what that means is you can make the right decision, but you might always feel a sense of sadness about it. But it doesn't mean that you should have made any other decision. So if you're divorced and you co-parent your children and you're no longer living in the house with them, you might very well regret those moments that you're not spending with them, those little everyday moments where you're making breakfast or rushing to school or kissing them goodnight in their beds. You might regret that. It does not mean that it was the wrong decision to get divorced necessarily. And actually, there would be so many other things that you wouldn't experience were you still in the dysfunctional relationship that you were modeling for your children.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really nicely put, isn't it? Because I like the idea that that being sad is okay.
Yes.
It's okay. We don't all have to walk around being extremely, insanely happy and positive and celebrate every life choice we've ever made.
Yes.
We can have sadness in our lives because that's what brings the light and the shade to life and relationships. So I think that's
life
a lovely way of putting it. Where can people find out more about you? Where can they listen to you?
I feel like we were just getting started, Kate. I've loved this. So people can listen to my podcast, How to Fail, on any of their podcast platforms. They can read my books. You're kind enough to mention the new novel, One of Us, which is out in September. I'm super excited about it. And you can find me on Instagram at Eliza B. Day, where there are lots of pictures of my ginger cat, Huxley, alongside many other things.
Fabulous. Well, thank you very much for joining me, Elizabeth. You can find me on LinkedIn, and also you can find the Divorce Podcast and download and stream on any of your favourite listening channels. Thank you very much for joining me today. It's been fantastic talking to you, and thank you everybody for listening.
Thank you so much.